Welcome to this Unity 6 beginners tutorial. Today I will show you how you can make a simple game of Yahtzee. If you don't know what it is, it's the game where you have to throw the 5 dice and try to make combinations to score points. So let's get right to it. We're going to start by creating a new Unity project. In the Unity Hub, click the New Project button. I will choose the Universal 3D template. In the beginning, the game will be just a simple 2D game, but later on we can add some nice 3D animated rolling dice. Give the project a new name. I will call mine Yahtzee tutorial. If you want, you can also specify the folder where you want the project to be placed. And finally, press Create Project, and Unity will start setting up the new project for our game. Start by adding a new folder to the Assets folder and call it Scripts. Open up the folder. Inside that folder, I will right-click and select Create, Scripting, and choose a monobehavior script, and we'll call the script Game Manager. In the scene, I will create an empty game object and call this Game Manager as well. Then I will drag the Game Manager script to the Game Manager object in the scene. Now let's open up the Game Manager script in Visual Studio. I will remove the update method. We don't need that one. The first thing we want to do is to get a result from a rolling dice. For this, we can just use a random.range method to get a number between 1 and 6. The maximum parameter is exclusive, so in this case we put 1 and 7 and not 6. To quickly test this, we can create a debug.log with the result. Save the script and go back to Unity, show the console window and press play. Try this a few times and see the different results we are getting. Now we know the rolling will work, so we can continue with it. Create a new empty script and call it die. Open the script. Start by adding a constructor to the class. In the constructor, add an integer parameter for a number of sides. This will give us flexibility to later on use this as well for dice with more than 6 sides. Then we will create a private property where we can store this and assign the parameter value to the private property. Create a new public method with an integer return type and call it rollDie. In this method, add random.range with min inclusive set to 1 and max inclusive set to number of sides plus 1. One more as we did before. And return this line. Now we have this logic in the die class, so we can remove the lines from the game manager we added before. Here we will create a new private method called initializeDice. In this method, create a for loop. And let it iterate 5 times for the 5 dice we need for this game. Create a new instance of die in the loop, and the number of sides should be 6. And for now, we will just let it roll on initialization to test it, and store the result in a variable, and write that result to the console with a debug.log. Make sure to call the initializeDice method from the start method. If we now run the game, we should get 5 different results in the console for the 5 dice in the game. The next thing we are going to do is set up some basic UI so we can display some results on screen. Also, make sure to save your scene. Go back to the Assets folder and create a new folder there called UI. In that folder, create a new UI document and call it Main UI. Double-click to open it in the UI builder. Start by dragging a visual element into the hierarchy of the main UI. Select the visual element and in the inspector go to background and select a background color. Make sure to set the alpha slider to 255 so it won't be transparent. But to really style a UI, it is better to set up a style sheet with the UI. In the UI folder, create a new folder called Styles. In that folder, you can create a style sheet and call it Main Style. And on the style sheet, press the plus button and select Add Existing USS. Browse to our style sheet and select it. Now there is only a reference to a visual element, which would affect all visual elements in the UI right now. We don't need this, so you can remove this from the style sheet. In the hierarchy, select the visual element and remove the background by right-clicking the property and choose Unset. Now select the visual element again and give it a name. I'll call it background. In the style sheet, we can add a selector for the background. Because we are going to reference it by name, we can remove the dot and type #background. I usually write all the elements in the UI with lowercase, and I just noticed I didn't do that for the visual element. So let's quickly change that to background with a lowercase. What I change in the style sheet will affect the background. So with background selected in the style sheet, we can select the background properties in the inspector. We can change the color to white. Now I will add two more visual elements as children of the background. On the top one, I will add a button. And I will give it the name Roll Button. And set the text to roll. In the bottom part, I will add another visual element, which I will call Die1. And here I will add a class to this object so we can use the same style properties for all 5 dice. So now we can duplicate the Die1 visual elements and rename them so they are from 1 to 5. Now we can add the new class to the style sheet called .dice. When you hover over the selectors, you'll see which parts will be affected in the viewport. Make sure you select the dice class in the style sheet and go to the inspector. We'll start by setting the size. I will make them 200 by 200 pixels. You won't see it that well now in the viewport, and you'll notice that they aren't square at the moment when I hover over the visual elements. To make it easier to see what we are doing, we can add a border to the elements. Select the dice class, add a border width of 5, and make the border color black. And add some radius to the corners to make them look a little bit like dice. Now you can clearly see that they are not square and on top of each other. To get a better preview of how your game is going to look like, we'll need to select the main UI.uxml. And check Match Game View. This will make the viewport the same as the actual game view. Now it would have the dimensions you'll see here. If you zoom out a bit, you'll see the result with square dice. Next, we want them horizontally positioned. In this case, I will just select the parent visual element, go to Flex in the inspector, and press the row direction button. You'll notice they aren't square anymore. This is because each visual element you create automatically gets a flex row property set to true. So we will remove that for all dice. To add some spacing, we can select the dice class again in the style sheet. Go to spacing and set the margin to 20. Finally, we want them to be centered. For this, we select the parent visual element again, and there we set the align items and justify content to align them in the center. So now the dice are nicely aligned. Now we still have to do that to the button. For this, we also select the parent visual element of the button and set the same properties in alignment. Let's also add a new selector for the button so we can style it as well. Call this selector hashtag roll button. Let's start by setting the size. 500 by 200 seems fine for now. Also add some border and rounded corners. And on the text, we can set the font size to 100. Inside the dice, we don't have anything yet to display the value. Later we will add images, but for now we can just do it with numbers. So I will add a label to the first die and call it die1-value. To style this one, we can access it through the dice class as well. By adding .dice space label, this way it will apply to all the labels in an object with the dice class. First, I select my die1 value again and set the text to 0. Select the selector and change the font size to 100. And align the text in the center. Select the dice class and set the align properties there for align items and justify content also to center. Because we didn't do this before, we now have to duplicate the label to all other dice and rename it. Our basic UI is now finished, but if you go to the game view, you won't see it yet. To make this happen, we will create a UI document and rename it to main UI. In the inspector, we can then select the source asset, which would be our main UI file that we created. And with that, the UI will show up in the game view. With some basic UI in place, we can now connect the code to the UI. For that, we go back to the game manager script. There, I will add a private UI document that I will call UI document. And we can expose this in the scene by making it a serialized field. Go back to the scene and select the game manager. Drag the main UI to the UI document field in the game manager. Now we will have access to the UI from the game manager. Next, we need to add a visual element, and I call it root. We will store the root element of the main UI by calling UI document.root visual element. From the root element, we can basically access all child objects in the UI. Now I will create a new private method called setupButtons. And I will create a private variable to store the roll button. In the setupButtons method, we will get the reference to the button in the UI by writing root.q for query. Then specify the type of the element you want to get, which would be button, and then the name of the button, which is roll button. Make sure to call the setupButtons method from the start method. And now to link some behavior to our button, we can write rollButton.register callback. We want this to be a click event, and then we add the callback. In the callback, we can call initialize dice for now, and you can remove it from the start method. When we now press the button in our game, the initialize dice method will be called and go through the loop and return 5 values. Let's give this a try. Make sure the console is empty. If not, you can clear it. Press the play button, then press the roll button and see the results in the console. Let's go back to the game manager script. We will now separate the initialization and rolling of the dice. For this, I will create a new private method called rollAllDice. And I will create a new private list of die to store the initialized dice. In the rollAllDice method, I will create another for loop. where I is smaller than dice.count. And here we will get a result by calling die with iteration.rollDice. Now we can call the roll all dice method by pressing the button. So cut that here. Then call the initialize dice method from start. In the initialize dice loop, we can remove the roll and debug log, and there we will add the initialize die to the dice list. Let's go to the die class. In the constructor, we will add a visual element and call it die VE. And we will create a private variable to store this visual element. And we will link it up in constructor. We will also add a private variable for the label, which will display the score. I will call it die label, which we can get by query on the visual element for type label. And for the name, I can use the name of the visual element and add dash value, because we named the label the same as the die visual element, but added the value part. In the roll die method, we will now get the result into a variable and return the result because we still need that later. And now we can assign the result we get from the roll to the label on the die to display in the game. Now go back to the game manager. First, we need to get access to the dice visual elements. We can do this by query on the root for a visual element. And for the name, we create a string with die and I plus 1, because the first one is called die1. It seems that I made a typo on visual elements, so let's fix that. And then we can add the die VE to the new die. Now let's have a look in the game if it works the way we expect it to. When I now press the roll button, the results will be shown on the 5 dice. Now we are going to build the mechanism to lock the dice, so when you want to keep a value, it doesn't roll again. So let's go back to the die class and create a new private bool called canRoll and set it by default to true. In the roll die method, we are going to add an if statement with a condition of canRoll and include all the lines in the if statement. And below, we will return the current value of the die by parsing the text on the label to an integer. This way, we will always get back 5 results, which we need to calculate the scores later on. To set and unset the canRoll boolean, we can add a click event to the die visual element, similar to how we did it with the button before. In the callback, we set canRoll to the opposite of canRoll to switch between true and false. This right now would work, but we wouldn't be able to see in the game which dice are locked and which are not. To make this visual, we can assign and remove a class from the dice visual elements, depending on whether they can roll or not. For this, I will add another if statement in the callback with a condition of can roll. Here we will remove a class from die visual element because the die should be able to roll. So type die ve dot remove from class list and add a class name. In this case, I will call it can't roll. In the else we will do the same, but we will use add to class list with the same name as before. This is all on this side. Now we need to add the class to our style sheet. So let's get back to the UI builder and add a class can't roll to the style sheet. Select the new class and go to the border in the inspector. And set the color to red. Only the attributes where the names are bold are being used. So with this we will only override the border color of our dice visual elements which have this class assigned. Now, let's see if it all works. Roll the dice. I will select the 4, the 5 and the 6, as that is close to a small straight. The red border appears on the dice we selected, and then I roll again. The ones with the red border didn't change as expected. Let's now select the 3 as well and try to get a large straight by rolling again. Unfortunately not, but the system works correctly. With this, I will wrap up this video. In the next part, we will start by adding a score sheet and calculating the possible scores of combinations of dice. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe to help me out. And I hope to see you again in the next one.